Welcome everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out today. We're really pleased to be hosting Pamela Erens today, celebrating the release of her latest novel, 11 Hours. She's also the author of two other acclaimed novels, The Understory and The Virgins. 11 Hours received rave reviews in the Boston Globe and New York Times, as well as starred reviews from Kirkus and Publishers Weekly. I'm going to introduce it. I'm just going to share a paragraph from Jen McDonald's recent review of it in the New York Times, because I thought she really captured how I felt reading it, and also she just really nailed why the book is so special. So she writes, Jen McDonald, we are reminded that every birth is an event without script, the ultimate suspense story. Erens registers this without preaching and without judgment, creating one of the most realistic and harrowing portrayals of birth you're likely to encounter in fiction. True. She has also written an indelible portrait of two women coming to terms with a desire, fear, crushing losses, and fragile joys that have carved their lives, and who know what it means to fight every hour, every minute to take another breath. Please join me in welcoming Pamela Erens.
Thanks for coming. I know it's the end of the reunion and people have places to go and homes to get back to, so it's very nice of you to stick around. I'm going to read for about 11 minutes. I just want you to know what you're in for. And but I need to give you a little context. So about 5 years ago, I got it into my head to write a novel that would take place entirely during one labor and delivery. And that is what I did, and that's the title, 11 Hours. It takes place over 11 hours. And the novel starts with a woman arriving at a New York City hospital. Her name is Laura. She's 31 years old. She's completely alone. She has no spouse with her, no lover, no sibling, no parent, no friend. And why this is so is gradually revealed. She presents to the nurse assigned to her, Frankline is her name, as very angry, very tightly wound, and rebuffing of help, although she clearly needs help. Frankline, the nurse, is about the same age, and she's also pregnant, about 15 weeks along, but she hasn't told anybody about this, including her husband. And this is because she has a fraught history of pregnancy and birth. She had an illegitimate child at 17 in Haiti, where she's from, and that child died 3 days after birth, which was devastating to her. She's now been married for over a decade, not to the father of that child. But she and her husband have not been able to have a baby. She was pregnant only once during that time, and she lost that child late in the pregnancy. So now that she's finally pregnant again, she's very afraid of something bad once again happening. The novel then is basically the story of the relationship between these two women over the course of the day, and how the past is continuing to make itself felt in their current situations. And the point of view throughout the book toggles between the two characters. Although I think the section I'm going to read now is entirely Frankline, the nurse. A few more specific things to note. Laura arrived with an unusually detailed birth plan, which you'll hear something about in a minute. And earlier, when Laura was having trouble handling her contractions, Frankline taught her to use her voice to kind of moan loudly through the contractions to better handle the pain and prevent herself from tensing and fighting against it. And just before this passage, the contractions had become erratic. When Laura came into the hospital, they were like every 4 minutes or so, which is basically the point at which they'll admit you and not send you home. But now things seem to be slowing down, which sometimes can happen. So. Oh, and Frankline is just coming back from her lunch break to the room. And there's been a substitute nurse in there. The nurse in room 7 puts down the magazine she's been reading and reports before going out that it's been 12 minutes since Laura's last contraction. Laura lies in her bed, unspeaking but restless. She laboriously shifts position and then a few moments later shifts again. She breathes heavily. She says she wishes things would keep going. Yes, yes, says Frankline soothingly. What more can she say? She learned long ago never to make promises to a woman in labor. Fast labors slow down, slow labors become fast. Anything can happen and often does. Women who say they will never accept an epidural beg for the epidural, beg to be knocked out entirely. Babies twisted up in the umbilical cord, starved of oxygen for a little too long. Birthmarks obliterating a child's face, absent fingers or toes. 50-hour labors, a mother suffering a heart attack while pushing. That one was only 32 years old, grossly overweight, yes, but seemingly hale, with an energetic, generous laugh. They saved her, but it was touch and go. And of course, there was Franklin's own child, 3 days old. He would never be more than 3 days old, who never once cried, but a few times lifted a weak half fist to punch the sky. Yes, yes, such a weak phrase. It needles her briefly with shame. Yes, yes, and no, no. These were the only two sentences she could bring out of herself when she first came to the States. I agree. I don't agree. I accept. I reject. The two elemental positions when everything else has been taken away. Those first weeks in New York scared out of her ability to recollect anything in the Creole English textbook Bernard had made her study. Have you a book or some music? She asks Laura. Laura shakes her head. Well then, can she turn on the TV? Another no. Franklin feels a flickering of exasperation. Why is there so much no in this girl? Why does she seem to take a grim pleasure in having nothing, no one, in refusing distraction or comfort? Franklin takes Laura's chart from the pouch beside the door and peruses it again. She removes Laura's birth plan and sits down with it at the computer desk. She scanned it first thing when Laura arrived, but is yet to read it point by point. The date on it is about 6 weeks ago, October 27, 2004. Laura has organized the plan under different headings. There are requests, interventions, in the event of a C-section, baby care immediately after birth, in the event that the baby is ill or handicapped, in the event that the baby dies. Now here's a quote from the birth plan. In the event that the baby dies, I seek the following: to be able to see and hold the baby for as long as I wish, not to be given tranquilizers or drugs that blunt feeling, to arrange the funeral myself. Laura stares up at the ceiling as if searching there for the baby who may or may not arrive, who will probably live but might also conceivably die. Franklin silently offers her admiration. Most birth plans specify that the patient wants a natural childbirth or hot compresses to reduce the chance of an episiotomy, wants to room in with the baby, and so forth. But the babies in these plans are never going to have deformed hearts or damaged brains. They are always going to be born with the right number of limbs. They are always going to survive. There is another form, a health proxy, tucked behind the birth plan. I, Laura Tannenbaum of New York, being of sound mind. These instructions apply if I am permanently unconscious or conscious but have irreversible brain damage. I do not want mechanical respiration. I do not want tube feeding. Witnessed by Diana Massey, residing at 501 Manhattan Avenue, New York, New York. Franklin flips back a few pages. Laura requests no Demerol, no Pitocin, no epidural, no supplementary bottles, no enema, no shaving. No, no, and again no. I went over all of that with Dr. Elspeth Chang, says Laura. Yes, says Franklin. She returns the plan to its folder. Let's take a walk, she announces. It might get you going again. This may be true, but will more likely simply serve as a distraction for Laura. She adds, having a child is usually just a long patience. How supple her speech is now. How she surprises herself at times. She's proud of her English. After 11 years, it is almost flawless. After that first fright, she took to it quickly, making her new neighbors, the ones of long residence, talk with her, correct her. Bernard said, you see, I told you. You have brains, quickness. You've got to study and get into school. Here you could become a nurse. She stands close while Laura pushes herself off the bed, ready to lend a hand, but Laura is steady on her feet. The hallway is more brightly lit than the labor room, although the tan yellow linoleum floor has a sickly hue. Laura moves slowly now. They pass an empty room, and then another, to which Marina assigned a 15-year-old shortly before Laura arrived. Often Franklin gets the teenagers, because Marina knows she has the patience for them, won't lecture them when they cry that pushing is too hard, or eat ring-dings and drop the wrappers on the floor. Franklin gets many of the difficult cases. She's seen as good with the obstreperous, the addled, the distraught. But this girl and her mother spoke mostly Spanish, so Marina gave the room to Alta. Franklin can hear the mother speaking to her daughter in a low, rapid voice, as if she has something urgent to impart before the baby's arrival. A whiff of fast food burger wafts out of the open door, making Franklin queasy. Surely the girl can't be eating one. They walk. Laura stops for a moment to adjust her gown, which has gotten caught up between her legs. All day the laboring and their caretakers trickle in and filter out and are replaced by different girls, women, husbands, mothers, sisters, friends. After today, Franklin will never again see this young woman with limp mussed hair who has just exited room 11, Elmo slippers on her feet, heading toward the nurse's station. Or the girl, 10 or 12 years old, about to become somebody's older sister or cousin, who is repeatedly filling a conical cup at the water cooler and dumping the water back down the drain. Franklin feels a helpless, pulsing goodwill toward all of them, tiny fragments of the great, whole, busy life of the universe that God in his goodness allows to unfold in her vision. Touching her cross, she passes the mussed-haired woman, the girl, and they dissolve back into the mystery of who they are and where they will soon be going. Outside a closed room sits a man wearing a Mets cap, his hands folded in his lap. Hispanic, probably Dominican, Franklin thinks, in his mid-20s or so. Franklin greets him and the man tips up his chin in acknowledgement. A muffled cry arises from within the room, and then, right afterward, the patter of women speaking, comforting. The man stares at his palms and hums quietly to himself. Inside his women's work, the place for a man is out here. That has never been Bernard's style. Even that last time when Franklin was rushed here in premature labor at 22 weeks, Bernard stayed in the room for the whole messy, agonizing thing. At the double doors, past a smaller nurse's station, a wall plaque displays an arrow to pulmonary. The station nurse nods to Franklin and buzzes them through. The corridor here, though it looks exactly like the one in maternity, has its own distinct and different atmosphere and smell. More vinegar, less sweat. It is emptier, more disquieting. Laura takes her time. About halfway down the first long line of doors, a clatter arises, and abruptly a wheelchair is beside them, with a man in perhaps his late 70s inside. Small, trim, with yellowed white hair, he turns to look at Laura with alert eyes. As the chair moves ahead, pushed by a young, dark-haired nurse, he twists back to keep her in his sight, and unexpectedly, Laura breaks into a responsive smile. In a loud voice, the man says, "You'll be fine, dear." "Okay," Laura replies. Her smile disappears, but she doesn't seem angry. Her shoulders loosen, her walk becomes more relaxed. The wheelchair reaches another set of double doors, and the nurse pushes through. Franklin watches as the soles of her waffled sneakers lift and fall and disappear. Then, "Oh," says Laura says, "Oh no." "Right here," Franklin tells her firmly, and as absurd as this seems, as appalled as Laura is, she obeys. Right there on the old linoleum, she can feel its cracks and bumps etch themselves into the tender skin of her knees. She goes down, and she remembers. She opens her mouth and her throat and urges out the great noise that mounts and crests and finally rolls back its force again. The external world disappears. All she hears is her own sound. She is a cave filled with a great echoing voice. When she is done, she closes her eyes for a moment, returning to herself. Franklin helps her to her feet. There are two elderly women standing opposite, gazing at her. One, in a hospital gown with a cardigan thrown over it, an arm covered with purple bruises, stares blankly. The other, dressed in slacks and a silky blouse, her still ample hair puffed around her temples and ears, holding her friend's wrist, wears an expression of distaste. "She's in labor," Franklin explains calmly, and this articulation of the obvious makes the disapproving woman's eyes lose their sharpness. She tips her head in acquiescence and turns to her friend. "She's going to have a baby," she says, as if the friend doesn't already understand, and perhaps she doesn't, because she simply licks her lips tremblingly several times. "Let's go back," says Laura. She feels a strange glee. She has flung her pain into this public space, not caring who observed it, whom she discomfited. This is possible, then. This can be done. But all the same, a reflective sense of embarrassment makes her turn from the two women and pretend she doesn't see them. There is something questioning in the fashionably dressed one's gaze that she doesn't want to encounter. Perhaps she is asking how Laura was able to do it, to release her pain so rudely. In childbirth class, her instructor spent a whole day talking about the history of men's handling of women in labor, the withholding of pain relief, or dosing patients into oblivion, or putting them in restraints. Cutting tools that didn't need to be used, the shaving, the assault of the forceps. This woman is old enough to have experienced some or all of that. In her questioning eyes, her story of pain is spilling silently out. But Laura does not want to know that story. There is time right now for her pain only.